2 Corinthians, the 3rd chapter. It's our Independence Day. We came to this country because we wanted to be able to worship God in our own way. We didn't want a king to tell us how we had to worship God. We didn't have a king tell us who we had to do and what. And in Corinthians, the 3rd chapter, starting in the 15th verse, it says, "But even to this day, when Moses is read, a veil lays on their hearts. Nevertheless, when one turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit is Lord, there is liberty. But we with unveiled faces behold as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as by the Spirit of the Lord." He said there in that 17th verse, "Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty." My father used to quote that a little bit different. "Where the Spirit is Lord, there is liberty." Liberty comes at a price. I had the privilege, my father and I went in Tim may have been with us. He would have been very, very, very small. We were in Sacramento, California, and we had the privilege to go up to the head of the Sacramento River. And we got to watch the salmon as they came upriver to the spawning grounds. And there was a huge hatchery there, and these fish would come and they would swim up these dams, and they would swim over the rocks, and they would come in so that they could lay their eggs, so that they could redo. Once they got there and they laid their eggs, normally they died. Liberty has been expensive. Over 50,000 men lost their lives or were injured badly just in the Battle of Gettysburg. Over 30 million people lost their lives during the both civilian and army during World War II. Liberty is not cheap. Liberty is not something that we can just say, well, this is how it is. He said, where the Spirit of the Lord is. And I like how, again, my father said it, where the Spirit is Lord, there is liberty. I have to become a servant. And Paul realized this in all of his writings. He makes constantly, I, the prisoner of the Lord Jesus. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, or where the Lord is, or where the Spirit is Lord, there is liberty. Even though I become a servant to Jesus Christ, I receive liberty. Even though I walk differently, I talk differently, I do things differently, I don't adjust myself to the world, I don't take upon their likeness, I am the one. You know, one man, and it was in the 70s, and I sit there and I'm going, oh Lord, that was a long time ago, and we weren't definitely where we are today. But he made the statement. It was a radio broadcast. We didn't have television a lot back then, and so Mom and Dad had the radio sitting in the dining room on the buffet, and they would listen to WCVO at the time, which was halfway decent. But one of the preachers made the statement. He said, the world has done more to change the church than the church the world. We have taken that verse of Scripture, be not transformed, or be not conformed, but be ye transformed. And we said, oh, I don't want to be conformed to the church. I want to be transformed like the world. And the world has done more to transform us than we to transform the world. Think of all the things that the church now allows in the church. Think of all the things that we've accepted. Think of all the things that we have allowed. We call it liberty. But the writer of several of the books calls it servitude to Satan. And he said here, he said, we no longer have this veil, but with this, there's going to be one thing. He says, we don't have this veil, and we behold in the mirror of the glory of God, and what God is doing is, He's trying to change us into His image. So I have a question for you. The things of this world, take anything you want, doesn't matter. Do you think it would be something that you would see on Jesus? Is it something that you think that He would condone? So when I'm looking into the mirror, I always remember that article in the newspaper out in California. A stripper got saved, and they asked her about, what happened since she's become a Christian, and she said, I became a better stripper. Christ made me a better stripper. Do you honestly think if you were to look in the looking glass that you would see Jesus, and you would see Jesus as a stripper? He says, I'm looking in the mirror and He is changing me into His likeness. And if I'm turning into His likeness, I'm not going to see the things that the world says are okay. Because just because the world says they're okay, God hasn't changed. Didn't we preach something about that the other? There was some, we kind of touched on that. God hasn't changed. So what we do is we sit there, and He said we have liberty, but the liberty is only when we give ourselves totally in servitude to Christ. People say, well, what does that look like? Look at Jesus. I love what He says. He says, I only do the things the Father tells me. Servitude. Yet, liberated. It's hard to think of those two. It's hard to think of those two in the same sentence. Servant, liberated. There's liberty when you're at home. I told Brother Dan last week, I said, now Brother Dan, if you need water, there's water in that refrigerator and you just go and get it. He kind of looked at me and kind of grinned, and I said, now listen, you don't have any problem going home and getting something out of the refrigerator. And he goes, no. I said, this is home. This is family. This is family. Sister Lorna wanted water. She could go out there and get a bottle of water. This is family. And in family, there's liberty. When I would go to my grandmother's house, I never had to ask, can I get a piece of cheese out of the refrigerator? Or a cookie out of her. I've been seeing them at the antique stores. It was a silver sphere about that big, had a lid on it with a walnut colored knob. So I've been seeing them in some of the antique stores. And they were actually called ice buckets. My grandmother used them for cookies. And my grandmother would slice up an apple and put in there with it to keep the cookies moist. One day I went to the refrigerator and I couldn't find the cheese, and I said something about Grandma hiding the cheese on me, and she got offended to think that I thought she hid the cheese, so I couldn't find it. But there's liberty. There's liberty in family. There's liberty when you're a part of something, yet as a part of something, you become a productive, how do I want to say, a supporting part of the same thing. And in that, where the Spirit is Lord, there's liberty. So as long as I give the Spirit control of my life, I have liberty. And just like I said about the wars, it costs something. I can't take part of the things that the world takes part of. When my teams with different places I've worked would go to the bar, I would say, sorry, I won't go. We're having a retirement party for so-and-so, and it's going to be at this bar, and I'd say, sorry, I can't go. My father, they knew that my father would not tolerate dirty jokes. These two men were telling dirty jokes back and forth, and he says, shh, here comes George. There's a reproach to having the Spirit as Lord. There's a cost to it. But with it, there's liberty. I want you to turn to Galatians 5. And we're going to start in the first verse and read through the 13th verse. It says, stand fast, therefore, in the liberty by which Christ has made us free. And do not be entangled again with a yoke of bondage. Indeed, I, Paul, saying to you that if you become circumcised, Christ will profit you nothing. And testify again to every man who becomes circumcised that he is a debtor to keep the whole law. You have become estranged from Christ, you who attempt to be justified by the law. You have fallen from grace. For we through the Spirit eagerly wait for the hope of the righteousness of faith. For in Christ neither circumcision nor uncircumcision availeth anything, but faith working through love. You ran well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? This persuasion, does it come from him who calls you? A little leaven leavens the whole lump. I have confidence in you, in the Lord, that you will have no other mind. But he who troubles you shall bear his judgment, whoever he is. And brethren, if I still preach circumcision, why do I still suffer persecution? Then the offense of the cross has ceased. I could wish that those who trouble you would even cut themselves off. For you, brethren, have been called to liberty. Only do not use liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. He says here, stand fast in the liberty. Now he's dealing with the church. And the Jews have come in, and the Jews have decided to say, hey, listen, you need circumcised. And you need to do this, and you need to do this, and you need to do this, and, well, you need to add this, and you need to add that, and this has got to be done, and that's got to be done, and you've got to observe this feast and this feast. And Paul says, if you're going to do this, you're no longer in liberty. And I like what he says there. He says if you're going to do part of the law, then you're a debtor to the whole law. Every one of you are sinners today, according to the law. You can't wear fabrics of mixed weaves. You know, those people used to like those suits that were wool blend. It had other things in it. Well, that wool blend was a sin. And how many of you have battlements around the top of your house? You know the little fence that keep people from falling off? That was a part of the law. People say, well, you know, I'm going to keep this part of the law. But he says here, he says, if you do, you become a debtor to the whole law. And so he said here, he said, stand forth in the liberty where Christ has set you free. It's no longer circumcision or uncircumcision. It's no longer Jew or Greek or Gentile. It's no longer barbarian. It's no longer Scythian. It's no longer any of these things. It's that you have been set into liberty through Christ. And now, you got to stay there. And I like what he says in that 13th verse. He said, for you, brethren, have been called to liberty. Only do not use this liberty as an opportunity for the flesh. I'm free! I don't know whether you ever remember that maybe you didn't see it, but that stupid little cartoon movie, You Rescuers Down Under. And there was a guy inside this poacher's place. And it was a lizard. His name was Frank. And he didn't want to become a purse. And he was taking the end of his tail and sticking it in the lock and trying to unlock the door. And pretty soon, the door flew open. He's flutting around and, oh, we got to get the keys. No, this, that, and the other. And pretty soon, Joanna, a goanna, comes through the door. And Frank runs back to the cage and slams the door shut. There's a lot of people in life that God has delivered them from something, and they feel liberated. But your liberation doesn't mean I can go back and now do the things that I was liberated from just because I'm liberated. Going back to the other, that comment that stripper made. Once she found Christ, she should have stopped that. It doesn't give her the liberty to go back. We worked with a church in San Francisco, and they would get these people that got saved, and some of them were coming out of some really bad things in the world. And one of the things I appreciated about the church was they had these two huge homes. They called them the mansions. And one was for men and one was for women. And they would send these people there. They had people there that could minister to them and could talk to them and could help them get out of the lifestyle that they were in. I remember Sister Gazowski has passed away. She was a phenomenal woman. She reminded me of Barbara Stanwyck in Big Valley. And she had that presence like she did in that show. And a person came in and God saved him, and she said, now walk right. She said, talk right. A woman came in and had 5 children, all with different husbands, and she looked at her and she said, go down, pick a name, call all the kids by the same last name. Get off of welfare and get you a job. And the woman did. And God blessed the woman. There's change when you become liberated. When you become liberated, there's something that changes. There has to be something that changes. And it doesn't mean that just because I've become liberated, I can keep doing the same thing. Paul writes here, he said, listen, he said, I've been liberated from these things. And if I go back to them, then I become a debtor to them. And he says, I've got to make sure that my liberty doesn't cause a problem, and I find myself back into bondage because I took the liberty. Churches, we've been in churches and they would have great services and they'd have knockdown, drag-out fights in the parking lot. They felt good, they felt free. And they go back and they revert back to the thing that God delivered them from. Because I feel free. I feel I'm free. I can tell somebody off. I'm free. I can do this. I'm free. I can do that. And the liberty was not given to us to have an opportunity of the flesh. That liberty was given to us to serve Jesus Christ. In James, first chapter of James in the 21st verse, it says, "Therefore lay aside all filthiness and overflow of wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your soul. But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourself." You know, there's a lot of people out there that deceive themselves. I know the word. I know all the words. I know all the words to all the songs. I know the Bible. But they don't do anything. They don't follow it. He says, "For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he's like a man observing his face in the mirror. For he observes himself, goes away, and immediately forgets what kind of man he was. But he who looks into the perfect law of liberty and continues in it is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work. This one will be blessed in what he does." He said here, but look into the perfect law of liberty. Another thing, remember I said servitude and liberty don't go in the same sentence, normally are opposites? Well, liberty and law doesn't seem to fit either. You mean there's law with liberty? Sure there is. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Love the Lord thy God with all thy soul, heart, mind, strength, spirit. And if you different writers of the Gospels added different things and changed a few words, and you know, so just love yourself love your Lord your God with everything you got. There's liberty. People always talk about the 10 Commandments, you know, thou shalt not commit adultery. I always like the New Testament. Jesus said, "He who looks at a woman in lust has already committed adultery." Well, I'll tell you what, that's a whole lot harder to do than not to commit adultery. Thou shalt not kill. 1 John, he says, "He who hates his brother is a murderer." That's a whole lot different than "thou shalt not kill." You know, you can do a lot of things to kill people, but we never think of hate as murdering. But John writes and he says, if you hate your brother, you're a murderer. And we can go on down. There is a law that comes with liberty. One of the hardest problems that we had in Iraq is after we overthrew the government and we brought in a democratic government, they could never get it together because they didn't understand the law of democracy. They understood the law of a dictator. They understood the law of a man who had a strong hand and controlled all of those tribes and kept them in line. But when that was gone, they didn't understand the law of liberty. The Russian church made a statement. They said, we have survived under all of this persecution that we received under communism. And when that was kind of lifted, and people were going in, and Bibles were going in, and churches began to come out from underground. And they said, we're going to have a problem here. We've got to see how the church is going to do in the area of liberty. We have now been given a liberty. How are we going to do? What's going to happen? But what they don't understand, there's a law in liberty. And he said here, looking into the law of liberty and continuing in it. It's amazing. You get some people, they know only the part of the law that pertains to them. Or the only part of the law that they feel is kind of gets them what they want, I guess would be the term I would want to use. But they forget about it all the rest. And here James says, look into the perfect law of liberty and continue in it. I love what David says. David says this throughout the Psalms all over the place. And he said, in thy law do I meditate both day and night. Your precepts are always before me. And James says, look into the perfect law of liberty. Live there. Follow it. Remember I said something in the beginning. Liberty costs something. People just say, oh, come to Christ, hey. You don't have to do anything. Sure you do. There's a law to liberty. There was a law in the Garden of Eden. You ever think about some of these animals, they come out and they say, well, this one was named this. And I looked at Donna the other day and I said, wow. Can you imagine Adam having to name all these things? No wonder we got platypus and octopus and we change the letter in the front and name it something else, or we change a few letters here and pretty soon you got all these names, and all these things. And the Bible says that God brought each animal to Adam and he named them. Lion, leopard, tiger. Oh, this one's white. White tiger. The snow leopard. The black panther. I mean, he had to go down and can you imagine after a few periods of this, and Adam says, I hope you don't have too much more. I'm running out of names. But there was a law, even in the garden. Thou shalt eat of every tree, but this tree you don't eat of. And in the liberty, it was to stay off of that tree. Stay away from that tree. Don't eat off of that tree. And that was their liberty. And the moment they ate of that tree, they lost their liberty. They lost their liberty. People say, but you understand something. Law or liberty had a law even in the Garden of Eden. There was still a cost. And that cost was, don't eat from that tree. Don't eat from it. All the things that God spoke to the children of Israel as they were coming out of Egypt and all through the Old Testament, He gave them a law and they still couldn't follow it. But the law was there. And I like something that Peter said, and it's in 1 Peter, the 2nd chapter. It says, as free, yet not using liberty as a cloak for vice. I'm going to keep my vices, I'm going to keep my things and just kind of put the cloak up, make me look good. Make people think I'm a good, wholesome person. Yet under my cloak, I'm darkness. I'm darkness. That's the 13th through the 17th verse, and that's actually the 16th verse. He writes in 2 Peter, the 2nd chapter, in the 19th verse, he says, while they promise them liberty, yet they themselves are slaves to corruption. People come up and they promise you something with no intentions of doing it. I see girls in our neighborhood walking down the streets with some of these guys. You almost have a feeling that these guys are pimps. And they're walking these girls down the street and talking to them, and these girls will have their suitcase or their bag with them or something under their arms. And I always wonder, what are they promising them? What are they telling them? They promise them liberty, but they don't get liberty, they get slavery. I'd like to take those girls and take them around the corner and show them the girl that's standing there that's probably around 30 years old and looks like she's 100, and she's got her teeth missing and she can't do a whole lot of anything, and she's out there selling her body, and they've promised her liberty and they brought nothing but corruption. She's hooked on drugs. I've seen them going down Weber Road and down Hudson. They're going down the street and they're spazzing out as they're walking, and you know they're on drugs. And some moron comes along and picks them up for sex. Where's the freedom? Where's the liberty? You talk to them. I'd like to get out of it, but I can't. I don't know anything else. There's judges here in Columbus that have taken some of these girls, and instead of giving them 30 days in jail or whatever, he sends them to a rehab facility, and they go through the rehab facility. The problem is they're not teaching them how to come back out and how to maintain themselves, and you find them back on the streets. They promised them freedom. They promised them liberty. But the people that are promising are slaves themselves to corruption. Understand something. We have been given liberty through Christ. It's kind of like our country. Our country, when you think about it, we had the Revolutionary War that brought us liberty and made us a country. We had the War of 1812 that came in, and England says we're not going to give up that quick. We threw them back out. We had internal fighting, the Civil War. We had World War I. We didn't get into it till the last. We had World War II that brought us in because of Pearl Harbor being bombed. We had the Korean, they don't call it the Korean War anymore, it was called the Korean conflict. We were over there trying to stop communism from coming down into South Korea. We were in Vietnam. Supposedly we were there as just advisors, but we did most of the fighting for liberty. Yet we've become slaves. Some of the things that we said we have liberty of, we've lost. Because somebody didn't want to pay the piper. There's a cost to liberty. There's a law. When they had this thing out in Oregon, and they got rid of the police and they got rid of all of these things, they found a lawless problem. And the problem was where there's no law, I can go back there and smack Glenn if I want to. She can reach over and punch Tim if she wants to. There's no law that says she can't when you're in a lawless situation. And the church has just kind of sat back as some of our liberties have been taken in the natural. But at the same time, we've lost some of our spiritual liberties. Because we're free. I want to be a free moral agent. And at the same time, we've got to look back into the law of liberty. Because that law, even though it's an oxymoron, law and liberty, you just don't think they go together, Well, if I'm liberated, why is there a law? But there's a law. And if you maintain inside the law of liberty, you remain free. In Romans the 6th chapter, Paul writes this. He said, "For whom a man serves, that's who he becomes a slave to. Whether sin unto death or righteousness unto eternal life." I've got to keep my eyes in the law of liberty. Liberty doesn't mean I can go out and enjoy the world. I have to keep my eyes in the law of liberty. And the law of liberty is going to take me and it's going to say, okay, Cindy, here's what you can do. And we need to keep you from there. You say, but I want over there. And eventually God will let you go over. Lynn in song service said, yelling, "Help!" Cindy yells, "Help!" And God says, "I told you not to go over there." He brings you back over. That law of liberty, you come back in, and all of a sudden, you find that liberty again. You find that sitting down at peace with the Father. There's that liberty inside the law of liberty. And as long as I follow that, then what happens is I find liberty. If I step out, think of one last thing. There's the broad way and the narrow way. On the narrow way is liberty. The things I need are there. The things that are necessary for me are there. On the broad way, there's all these things to stop me, slow me down, things to look at, things to do, things to get me into trouble, things to cause me to lose my life, all these things. But if I stay on the narrow way, there's freedom. There's laws, but there's freedom. And I begin to follow that way. Remember, liberty costs. And with liberty comes a law. All these kids want to throw everything to the wind. Just be themselves. But the problem is, there's issues with that. And they're soon going to run into them. They're soon going to run into them. And when they do, they find out what they had and what they thought they had was liberty. And the problem was, it wasn't. It brought them right back to the same bondage they were trying to get out of. It's amazing. I'm going to close with this. Man one time, story was told, man one time went to a town and he saw lurking in the corner death. And it scared him, and he took off running and went to another town. When he got there, death came up to him. And he said, I left you over there. He says, well, I was wondering how I was going to meet you here. He said, because I have an appointment with you here. The very thing he was running away from, he met face to face. The very thing these people are running away from, they're going to meet face to face. And it's not going to be the thing that they hoped it was. Let's stand. Liberty. We used to sing a song when we were in school, My country 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. It's hard for kids to sing that today because we don't have the sweet land of liberty. Land where my father died, land of the pilgrim's pride. But we try to change history because we don't like how history made it sound. We don't like the one nation under God. So we change things. It says, let freedom ring. Their freedom is so I can do whatever I want to do, whenever I want to do it, however I want to do it. That's not liberty. That's not freedom. That's enslavement to Satan. This morning, liberty. Liberty. It's a powerful thing if we stay within the law of liberty. Len, would you dismiss us?